we move on to some more 5Ds shenanigans as we take a look at the Reptilianne archetype. And with this archetype we're kind of ending off an era because Reptilianne is the last archetype to be used by the Dark Signers, and the Dark Signer in question is Misty Lola, who was Aki's opponent during the Dark Signers arc. And yeah, this archetype is very similar to Venoms, as in they are heavily based on reptiles who do some attack reduction. However, instead of relying on a field spell to live, so they're better by default. And their main gimmick is not just minuscule attack reduction of 500 during each end phase. They just flat out reduce attack to 0 upon applying their effects, and they're mostly based on control effects oriented towards monsters who have already been, whose attack has already been reduced to 0. They're sort of lacking in that aspect, but yeah, let's just start the analysis right off. And first off, we have their first monster, Reptilianne, NAGA, which is a level 1 reptile with 0 attack and defense, and this card cannot be destroyed by battle. The attack of any monster that battles this card becomes 0 at the end of that battle phase. During your end phase, change this face-up defense position card on the field to face-up attack position. Okay, so this was and still is one of the archetype's better monsters due to the fact that it's an indestructible level 1, which can be searched out with 1-for-1 and Whereof Though, and also she reduces the monster's attack instantly to 0 at the end of the battle phase, which was a pretty nasty thing to do, since this was basically a very nice first turn phase down, since the opponent can run into it and then lose all of the attack on his monster. But one of the main problems I have with this is, well, the fact that this is one of their best monsters, in fact, which actually reduces the attack of the monster to 0. And of course this effect is not the fastest of the bunch, and not to mention as well that she constantly switches herself to attack position, so of course you can ram it into something yourself. And of course, since she gets locked into attack position, you're going to be taking quite some damage as a result of that. Unless you're running stuff like Spirit Barrier to prevent taking damage like this, or damage equal reptiles to basically swarm the field while taking said damage. So this is a 3-off staple out of obligation, not out of personal choice. Anyway, next up we have Reptilianne's Servant. This is a level 1 with 100 attack and defense, and destroy this card if there are face-up monsters on the field other than this card. Destroy this card when it is targeted by a spell or trap card, and neither player can normal summon a monster while this card is face-up on the field. Okay, so what is this thing even supposed to try to accomplish? Okay, so basically it destroys itself if there are any other face-up monsters on the field, and if it's targeted by a spell or trap effect, which is something that happens like 99% of the time in the game. And not to mention that the only thing it does is prevent both players from normal summoning, so setting and special summoning is still an option you can take, and not to mention with a single special summon you basically blow this thing away. And yeah, this is actually one of the worst support cards ever. One of the worst monsters in the entire game, I would actually say. And if you can actually believe it, this thing actually comes from the anime. Yeah. Was the anime effect better? I honestly don't know. I think it was actually the same as this card's actual effect. Gotta go check it, but if the anime version was better, it probably wasn't by much, so you better just ignore this one. Now we move on to their level 2s, the first one being Reptilianne Viper. This is their first tuner monster, and it was for the longest time their only tuner monster, and its effect is that when it's normal summon you can select and take control of one face-up monster with 0 attack and your opponent controls. This right here is something the Reptilianne highly like doing, as in the aforementioned control effects were relegated to monsters with 0 attack, and this one is quite literally a control effect, since basically I think this thing does not even target. Since it says select, I'm not even sure. Some cards which actually do target also state select, so I'm not sure if this one also targets the monster. But hey, a monster which can actually snag a Time Lord monster like this is not something to. Okay, it is a pretty specific thing to mention here, but it deserves some, at least some credit due to the fact that it's able to snag a Time Lord monster easily. But yeah, most of the targets you would want to snag are gonna be higher level monsters, meaning that yeah, the Archetype does have a synchro monster. That's why it has, of course, a tuner. Most of the targets you would want to snag with this effect, you would want to use as a link material, since they'll be a bit low. Their level will be a bit too high for this thing to work with, in order to make their own synchro monster, and their synchro monster is on the mid-level category of monsters. So yeah. However, another tuner you can consider running is Reptilianne LAMIA, which is one of their newer pieces of support. And its data production really shows, because check this thing out. If this card is in your hand and all other monsters you control are face-up reptile monsters, minimal 1, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls, change its attack to 0, and if you do special summon this card, then take damage equal to that monster's original attack. If this card is sent to the graveyard as synchro material, you can target up to 2 face-up monsters on the field, change their attack to 0, and you can only use one of these effects per turn. This thing is an absolute masterpiece and should always be ran at 3, and yeah, the fact that it's also a tuner monster also helps. But the only bad thing I have to bring up here is that these effects cannot be used on the same turn. Like the floating effect when it's used as synchro material, and its special summoning condition. The special summoning condition is honestly enough the best feature about the card, as it provides the some nice material for link plays and also for synchro plays. So yeah, and it also works with the nature of the archetype of reducing a monster's attack straight to 0. So run 3 and never any less. And it's a bit of a shame that these effects cannot be used on the same turn, otherwise the effect this card would be a whole lot better. And now we move on to their only level 3 monster, Reptilianne GORGON. If this card attacks a monster after damage calculation, the attack of that monster becomes 0, also it cannot change its battle position. So essentially it's basically NAGA with attack points, except this thing needs to attack something in first in order to actually do the attack draining. And that's about it. Naga's battle indestructibility is gone, which was kind of but then again, you can actually use this thing in order to actually deal some damage, unlike NAGA. So run both by preference. So yeah. Next up we go on to into their level 4 lineup. First up we have Reptilianne SCYLLA. If this card destroys an opponent's monster with 0 attack by battle, you can special summon that monster from your graveyard to your side of the field in face-up defense position. The effects of that monster are negated. Okay, so this is essentially a normal summonable Goyo Guardian for the archetype. Of course, it works on monsters with 0 attack. If it actually didn't negate the effects of the monsters like the original Goyo Guardian, I would have called it a better card. As it is now, it just provides some link materials, and that's about it. So run by preference, in my opinion. It's also their biggest beat stick. It's also a non-tribute monster. So be my guest if you're interested. Now the next monster, Reptilianne GARDNA, is actually a very amusing card to see, because this thing actually has a pretty nice array of effects and stats. It has 0 attack and 2000 attack defense, and when this card you control is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, add 1 Reptilianne monster from your deck to your hand. And yeah, back in the day, this used to be a pretty legit searcher, since it triggers by just destruction from anywhere, including your own effects. And not to mention that it also has 0 attack, which actually, along with, of course, LAMIA, Viper, and NAGA, which also synergizes with one of their main deck boss monsters, And the only problem I have is that it's water attribute for some reason, while all the other Reptilianne monsters are dark. Not sure why they wanted to make this a water attribute, I really don't. Which makes Allure of Darkness a bit of a risky choice due to the fact that you essentially want to run 3 of these, so yeah. Anyway, next up we move on to their tribute monsters, first of which we have Reptilianne MEDUSAH, which is a level 6 monster with 2200 attack and 800 defense, and it allows you to send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard to select 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, and the attack of the selected monster becomes 0, and it cannot change its battle position. It's an alright effect if we completely ignore the existence of Reptilianne LAMIA. Yeah, back in the day this used to be a okayish effect, even though this kind of effect is plastered on a monster which is a level 6, which also needs discard fodder in order to do anything. So yeah, if it also targets, so it's not very impressive in that regard, but I guess if you really feel like it, I guess you could run 1 or maybe 2 if you really want to risk it. And their final main deck monster is Reptilianne Vasquez. This card cannot be normal summoned or set, and this card cannot be special summoned except by tributing 2 face-up monsters with 0 attack from anywhere on the field. Once per turn you can select and destroy 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, and there can only be 1 Reptilianne Vasquez on the field. Okay, so the destruction effect is pretty generic and mediocre due to the fact that it's limited to face-up monsters only. But the absolute best thing about this card is its summoning condition. This is, other than Mother Spider, this is the only monster in the entire game which can be special summoned to your side of the field by tributing only the opponent's monsters. So yeah, that is a pretty versatile way of summoning it. And it's also a level 8 monster, so you can run trade-in as for some added draw power. And not to mention that this thing actually saw some brief competitive play during Dragon Rulers formats to basically tribute the Dracosac tokens, which were always giving some players trouble back in the day. So yeah, Vasquez is actually a very potent form of removal if you actually manage to spawn 2 0 attack monsters with their Reptilianne effects. Yeah, Reptilianne LAMIA makes this thing a lot more easier to summon than it initially was before. Ghost of a Grudge is also a nice trap card you can actually splash into the Reptilianne as a decent tech option, and yeah, it's basically a pretty solid main deck boss monster. But let's move on to their extra deck now. Starting of course with the Reptilianne HYDRA, their synchro monster. This is a level 6 with 2100 attack and 1500 defense. Requires a Reptilianne tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. When this card is synchro summoned, destroy all face-up monsters with 0 attack your opponent controls and draw 1 card for each monster destroyed. Okay, so this would actually be an okayish effect if the archetype had some level, a higher level of potency in terms of splashing, affecting monsters with their attack drainage. But on a good day, this all it does is give you 2 to 3 draws and nothing more. Well, yeah, if the archetype had a lot more versatility in affecting the field massively with the attack drainage, I could see this as a very versatile comeback option, or maybe an extender if you're summoning it earlier. So yeah, it can give you a pretty hefty amount of draws, so you can continue your plays. But as it is right now, it's probably fine if you decide to run 1 max. And next up we have their final monster, which is their Link monster, Reptilianne Echidna. This is a Link 2 monster with 200 attack and points left and bottom right. Requires 2 monsters including a reptile type monster. And if this card is Link summoned, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, change its attack to 0, and during the main phase if your opponent controls a monster with 0 attack, you can add a Reptilianne monsters with different names from your deck to your hand up to the number of monsters your opponent controls with 0 attack. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except reptile type monsters, and you can only use each effect once per turn. Okay, so it's alright as far as link monsters go. In fact, it's actually their best extra deck monster, as it allows you to perform some massive searches depending on how many monsters the opponent has on the field with 0 attack. But the core of the problem is that the archetype still does not have any coherent way to massively do this effect, as in to affect multiple monsters at once besides Reptilianne LAMIA, no matter how good she actually is. As in, this archetype really has the potential to do something incredibly dangerous in the metagame, but that potential is constantly not met due to the fact that this archetype lacks the ability to spread this kind of effect and attack drainage en masse. But then again, this is a nice monster which can be special summoned with some nice Reptilianne text such as Gentlemender, Kagetokage, and all the other generic reptile support, which is not plentiful, but hey, beggars really can't be choosers, right? Anyway, let's move on to the spell and trap support. We have 4 spells and 1 trap. First spell is Reptilianne Spawn. Remove from play a Reptilianne monster from your graveyard to special summon 2 Reptilianne tokens, which are Reptile type Earth, level 1, and attack 0 and defense 0. And yeah, I honestly like this thing because it can result in a quick Echidna. You can also use it as tribute fodder for Vaski or Medusa. It can basically be used for any other link monster which you might need at the moment. Only, again, problem it's not as necessarily a problem, but I find it funny that these tokens are earth monsters. Again, like Gardna's water attribute, same issue here. But the fact of the matter is that I don't actively see many Reptilianne builds running this for some reason, even though this card is much more appreciated nowadays. But that might change, who knows. Maybe it's already being ran at the time of recording this video, so yeah, run by preference, but I would appreciate if you ran at least 2 of these. Next up we have Reptilianne Poison. Activate only if you control a face-up Reptilianne monster. Change one defense position monster your opponent controls to a face-up attack position and reduce its attack to 0. I got a new subscriber at the time of reading out this video, Takamaki Joker. Thank you for subscribing, dude. You're awesome for doing that. You won't be regretting it. But anyway, back to this. This is one of those things that I mentioned when I said that this archetype lacks the ability to give the massive attack drainage en masse on the opponent's monsters. This would have actually been okay if it actually affected multiple monsters, and of course if it didn't affect only defense position monsters, because come on, we're in a Master Rule 4 where defense position monsters are not that prevalent. Of course, if you're playing this against super heavy samurais or exalt stall builds, which I am honestly not sure if they even exist nowadays, but anyway, be sure to check this then. But as it is now, it's mostly irrelevant, so mostly ignore it. Next up we have Reptilianne Rage, which is an equip spell which can be equipped to any monster you control, and that monster becomes reptile type. It gains 800 attack, and if this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you target a face-up monster your opponent controls, it loses 800 attack. Okay, so the fact that this thing equips to any monster is beyond head-scratching due to the fact that you'd expect it to be equipable only to Reptilianne monsters or reptile type monster. Also, the equipped monster also becomes reptile type monster for some reason. And not to mention the floating effect makes 0 sense as opposed to as opposed to making the attack point 0. This thing just scratches it for 800, which is okay-ish when it comes to attack reduction, but considering the fact that Reptilianne are not focused on scratching the attack for 800 instead they're just used to reduce the attack to absolute 0. This card makes very little to no sense. I guess you can maybe use this equip spell in order to make a non-reptile type monster which synergizes well with Reptilianne into one in order to basically use it as I don't know, ammo for link material for the Echidna link monster. but that's literally the only use I can think of this card. And of course it provides a hefty attack boost, and the floating can actually disrupt a player or two if you're using it for that purpose. But then again, just ignore it. Spawn is their best spell card, and the other best spell card of the archetype is VIPER'S Rebirth, and their final spell card. Activate only if all monsters in your graveyard are reptile type. Select a non-tuner monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Destroy it during the end phase. Okay, so unlike Reptilianne Rage, this one is actually pretty decent. This one, if all monsters in your graveyard are reptile type, which they most likely are going to be due to the fact that you're playing a reptile themed deck, you can basically revive any non-tuner monster in the archetype and in your deck, and basically any non-tuner monster in the game. So you can basically revive Gentlemander or Kage or any other monster which happens to be reptile and non-tuner. So yeah, it's basically a somewhat specific monster reborn, but hey, you better run 2 or 3 of these because it's one of the most potent forms of revival the archetype has, and it's one of the better ways to resummon Medusa. So anyway, next up we have their final card, which is the continuous trap Serpent Suppression, and its only effect is that face-up attack position monsters with a 0 attack your opponent controls can be destroyed by battle with Reptilianne monsters. Of course, the idea of this thing is to enable you to constantly ram into the opponent's monsters with 0 attack in order to basically scratch them for additional damage. But if we completely ignore the fact that, of course, this card actually works against some of the cards in the archetype, like SCYLLA's Guardian effect. So she can't basically use the monsters. So you basically can't use those monsters resummoned as link material. So yeah. Also, it's an unsearchable continuous trap, so don't bother with this one. And now it's time for the good old grading. In terms of consistency, these gals have some consistency option in form of King of the Feral Limbs, damage equals reptile. GARDNA is a very good searcher, and also HYDRA can search out a lot of stuff if the conditions are met. However, keyword here being if conditions are met. GARDNA is a good searcher, but GARDNA cannot search all that often. Not to mention, King of the Feral Limbs is a rank 4 Xyz monster, which they don't have access to all the time. Damage equals reptiles is a continuous trap. And Echidna heavily relies on the opponent controlling a whole bunch of monsters with 0 attack, which is not something that happens very often. The potential is sort of there. It's very close to a 2 out of 3, but I must give it a 1 out of 3, unfortunately. If the archetype had a somewhat consistent way to give the opponent 0 attack monsters, and maybe in form of 0 attack tokens, yeah, Ojama Trio can actually be put to good use there. And if more cards in the archetype were focused on giving your opponent very huge amounts of monsters with 0 attack, which cannot be used as extra deck material, so they can fuel a Echidna search effect, I would honestly consider giving them a 2 out of 3. It's very, very close though to a 2 out of 3. In terms of power is only relegated to their boss monsters, which do not hit the field all that often, and they're mainly used for their removal effects and don't stick around for too long, and they're basically used as link material or extra deck material. So, and the only ones among those are Voski, Hydra, and Medusa if you decide to run her, so that's a 1 out of 3. In terms of comeback ability, they have a lot of stuff to talk about here. They have access to Evil Dragon Ananta, which is a pretty nice boss universal reptile type boss monster. However, you need to win on the turn you summon her. Voski has a very potent removal effect herself. Hydra can occasionally remove some stuff from the field upon her synchro summon. They have a lot of ways they can perform a comeback, and of course LAMIA is ridiculous, and yeah, they certainly have what it takes for some solid comeback ability, so I'll be generous and give them a 2 out of 3 in comeback ability. In terms of protection, well, there's barely any if we're considering it. Naga's battle immunities as far as it goes, so that's about it. 1 out of 3. In terms of versatility, well, they have some reptilian tech choices they can run in their pure build. Their splashability in other archetypes doesn't extend to maybe a Echidna being used in a reptile deck here and there. Viper's Rebirth is a generic support card for reptile type monsters. Reptilianne Spawn is a okay-ish token spawner if you decide to run some Reptilianne monsters and there are in other decks, so not much but not too great either, so I'll give them a 1 out of 3 here as well. And that was it for Reptilianne, and now I've officially covered all of the Dark Signer archetypes. And stay tuned for the next episode, because I'm not even sure myself what it's gonna be. If it goes according to the rank 10 marathon, it should be another GX era archetype. But considering how the selection pack, selection 10 unveiling goes this evening, if the last few cards are going to be unveiled this evening, it might be a brand new archetype not featured here nor the rank 10's channel, and that archetype it will be a Vrains era archetype, so stay tuned for that. It'll be a surprise episode for all of you. So thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos and updates. Comment, like, and subscribe. Yes, be sure to check out my Patreon when you got the time. Maybe drop a few donations if you feel like it. And I'll see you all, and have a good day. Peace.